I used to think every family had an unspoken rule about fairness. Not written down, not said out loud, just understood. You pull your weight. You do what's needed. And when things go wrong, nobody quietly pushes one person under the bus to save themselves. That belief didn't survive my 30s. At the time, I was the dependable one. The one who answered calls. The one who showed up early and left late. If something needed fixing, I fixed it. If a problem needed smoothing over, I smoothed it. I wasn't the loudest, the smartest, or the most charming. I was just reliable. That's important. Because when everything collapsed, reliability was what made me disposable. The business had been in the family for years. Nothing glamorous, not some empire. Just steady, boring income that paid bills and kept everyone comfortable. On paper, it was shared responsibility. In reality, I handled the day-to-day while everyone else hovered at a safe distance. They trusted me. That's what they said, anyway. The first sign something was wrong wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no crisis meeting. Just a letter. Brown envelope. Official tone. One of those letters that makes your stomach tighten before you even open it. Outstanding liabilities, irregularities, a review. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I went through the accounts. I didn't panic. I still trusted them. That was my first mistake. I rang my brother first. Calm voice, casual. Asked if he'd seen anything strange lately. He said no, sounded distracted, like I'd interrupted dinner. I rang my sister next. Same answer. Probably nothing, she said. These things sort themselves out. When I finally spoke to my parents, the tone shifted. Not concern, not confusion, distance. My father said, "You've been running things. You'd know more than us." It wasn't an accusation, not yet, but it planted the seed. Over the next few weeks, more letters arrived, more questions. I pulled records, sent emails, asked for statements. I was still trying to fix it, still assuming we were all on the same side. But every conversation started changing shape. They stopped saying we. They started saying you. You handle the accounts. You sign off on payments. You're the one dealing with them. All technically true, conveniently incomplete. By the time the formal review began, the story had already been written. Quietly. In side conversations I wasn't part of. I realized that during the first meeting. 5 of us around the table. External advisor present. Neutral tone. Professional smiles. The questions weren't open-ended. They were aimed, directed. And every answer pointed back to me. When I tried to explain that decisions were shared, approvals verbal, pressure constant, I got looks. Not angry ones. Worse. Pitying ones. As if I were rewriting history. Afterwards, my mother pulled me aside. She lowered her voice the way she used to when I was a kid and someone was listening. "Sometimes," she said, "one person has to take responsibility so things don't get worse." That was the moment it clicked. They weren't confused. They were coordinated. The pressure didn't come all at once. It was gentle, persistent, reasonable sounding. If you just acknowledge the mistake, this goes away. You don't want this dragging on. It's better if it's contained. Contained. That word came up a lot. I asked what would happen if I didn't. If I pushed back. If I told the full story. My brother shrugged. My sister said I was being dramatic. My father went quiet. Then he said, "We can't all go down for this." That sentence stays with you. I was offered support, quiet support, conditional support, help with legal fees, temporary assistance, emotional reassurance. All of it hinged on one thing, that I accept responsibility. So I did. Not because I was guilty, because I still thought family meant something. The fallout was swift. Official conclusions, sanitized language, no criminal charges, but enough stain to follow me. Word spread, not through announcements, through tone, through what people didn't say. Suddenly, invitations slowed. Phone calls stopped. People who'd known me for years started speaking carefully around me like I might break. I lost work. Opportunities dried up. Nobody said why. They didn't have to. Inside the family, things stabilized. They reorganized, restructured, moved on. I was told I should be grateful it wasn't worse. The years after that blurred together. I worked where I could, kept my head down, tried not to think about how neatly everything had been laid at my feet. Whenever I raised the past, even gently, the response was always the same. Why are you still stuck on that? It's over. We all agreed. That phrase, we all agreed. It rewrites reality if you let it. I started keeping records without really admitting why. Emails I'd never deleted. Notes I'd scribbled at the time and forgotten about. Copies of statements I'd once assumed everyone else had. At first, it was just self-defense. Proof I wasn't crazy. Then patterns emerged. Dates that didn't line up. Approvals that were suddenly never discussed. Instructions that had been given verbally and then denied. Every time I saw one, something tightened in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. This hadn't been an accident. It had been a decision. And the more distance there was between us, the clearer it became that I wasn't being punished for a mistake. I was being sacrificed for convenience. By the time anyone noticed I'd stopped arguing, it was already too late. Because I wasn't trying to clear my name anymore. I was paying attention. There's a strange thing that happens when people decide you're the problem. They stop listening for truth and start listening for compliance. At first, I still tried. Carefully, calmly. I'd bring things up in neutral moments, over coffee, at birthdays, in passing. Not accusations, just questions. Do you remember that payment in March? Didn't we agree on that expense together? Why does this report say I approved it alone? Every single time, the response followed the same pattern. Confusion, dismissal, moral superiority. I don't remember it that way. You're reading too much into it. We trusted you. That last one was always delivered gently, like a compliment, as if trust were the reason I should carry the weight. Over time, the questions stopped being answered at all. They were treated like relapses, as if I were ill. My sister once sighed and said, "You really should talk to someone. You're still so angry." I wasn't angry. I was exhausted. They moved on with their lives, new cars, holidays, renovations, stories about how hard those years had been for them. I heard those stories secondhand, always softened, always framed as shared suffering. Meanwhile, I rebuilt quietly. Smaller jobs, less visibility, less trust in anyone's version of events but my own. I learned how reputation actually works. It doesn't collapse loudly, it erodes. A missed callback here, a polite rejection there, an opportunity that suddenly isn't available anymore. Nobody says, "We don't trust you," they just stop offering. Family gatherings became exercises in restraint. The air was polite but tight. Conversations skimmed the surface. If I spoke too long, eyes drifted. If I fell silent, nobody noticed. Once, after a few drinks, my brother laughed and said, "Well, at least it's behind us now." I looked at him and realized something important. It was behind them. It was still sitting squarely on my chest. I stopped trying to explain myself after that. Not as a tactic, as a survival instinct. That's when the balance shifted, even if nobody noticed yet. Because when you stop defending yourself, you gain something precious. Time. I started organizing everything. Properly, chronologically, not emotionally, like evidence. I wasn't hunting for revenge. I wasn't even planning anything. I was building clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Years passed, parents aged, conversations turned toward logistics instead of blame, care arrangements, assets. Getting things in order. That phrase should make you alert. It did. The first crack appeared during a casual conversation with my mother. She mentioned a document she was updating. A will. Nothing urgent. Just sensible planning. She said, "Everything's pretty straightforward now." That word again. I asked, carefully, what she meant by now. She waved it off. After all that unpleasantness, once things were settled. Settled. According to whom? I went home and pulled out the old files again. This time, not to reassure myself. To test something. I cross-checked dates against statements I'd never bothered to align before. Matched emails to transactions. Found one instruction I'd received late one night, forwarded from my father, referencing a conversation I supposedly hadn't been part of. It contradicted the official version cleanly, not ambiguously, cleanly. Then I found another. Then another. Individually, they were forgettable. Together, they formed a pattern that could not exist unless the story I'd been blamed for was false. That was the moment I understood something else. They hadn't just let me take the fall. They'd built their future on it. Everything that followed, financial stability, clean records, restored trust, rested on one assumption remaining intact: that I would stay quiet. The leverage didn't announce itself. It arrived like a weight settling into my hands. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't hint. I didn't change my behavior at all. That's the mistake people make. They think power needs to be visible. It doesn't. What it needs is inevitability. The next year, my father's health declined. Slowly. Unremarkably. Enough to start conversations nobody enjoys. Lawyers entered the picture. Accountants. Neutral professionals asking careful questions. One of them called me unexpectedly, just to fill in some background. I answered honestly, carefully, without accusation. I mentioned dates, shared documents, forwarded emails. There was a pause on the line, not disbelief, interest. After that, things began to move differently. Meetings I wasn't invited to were rescheduled to include me. Language softened. People checked how I was feeling. Old grievances were reframed as misunderstandings. My sister once said, "I think we all did the best we could at the time." That sentence landed flat, because now I knew exactly how deliberate it had been. What surprised me wasn't the fear when they realized I remembered everything. It was the relief. They were tired of carrying it. They just needed to know whether I was going to speak. I didn't rush it. I didn't threaten. I let them sit with the uncertainty. Because here's the truth nobody talks about. The real power shift doesn't happen when you expose someone. It happens when they realize you could, and that you don't need to. By the time inheritance discussions became unavoidable, the dynamic had inverted completely. They needed cooperation. I had conditions, and for the first time since that brown envelope arrived all those years ago, the silence belonged to me. By the time we all sat down together, nobody pretended this was a family conversation anymore. It was procedural. The table was larger than it used to be. Not the kitchen table from years ago. A proper one. Polished, neutral, chosen specifically so nobody felt like a guest or a host. Lawyers had that effect on people. I arrived early, not to make a point, just habit. I brought a slim folder. Nothing dramatic, no thick binders, no color-coded tabs. Enough. They arrived one by one. My brother avoided eye contact. My sister smiled too brightly. My father looked smaller than I remembered. Age had finally done what guilt hadn't. We exchanged pleasantries like strangers waiting for a delayed flight. The lawyer opened with a summary. Calm, objective. Words like clarification, alignment, finalization. Nobody mentioned the past directly. That was my cue. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even say the word blame. I said, before anything moves forward, I need the record to be accurate. Silence. I slid the folder forward. Not pushed, placed. Inside were copies, emails, Dates, instructions, the sort of paperwork that doesn't argue. It just exists. I walked them through it slowly, one item at a time, not explaining motives, not assigning intent, just facts. This was sent on this date. This instruction came from here. This approval was discussed before this payment. Nobody interrupted. They couldn't, because every time someone opened their mouth, they realized something crucial. I wasn't asking for acknowledgement. I was documenting correction. When I finished, the lawyer cleared their throat and asked a single question. Is there any dispute regarding these documents? No one answered. That was the sound of a decade collapsing. My sister finally spoke. Why are you bringing this up now? I met her eyes, calmly. Because now it matters. That was the only explanation she got. The negotiations that followed weren't dramatic. They were careful, controlled. Nobody wanted escalation. Everyone wanted containment. The same instinct as before. Only this time, I was the variable they couldn't manage. They proposed adjustments, quiet amendments, language changes, structural solutions that would avoid reopening old wounds. I listened. Then I said no. Not loudly, not angrily, just no. I laid out my conditions, clearly, reasonably, in writing. Restoration of my standing, formal acknowledgement of shared responsibility, financial correction proportional to the damage. No clauses preventing disclosure if misrepresentation continued. I didn't ask for punishment. I asked for alignment with reality. The room went still again. My father looked at me for a long time, longer than he had in years. Then he nodded. It wasn't an apology. It was surrender. The paperwork took months, quiet months, polite emails, careful wording, a few strained phone calls. I never chased. I never reminded. I knew the direction of gravity now. When it was done, nothing exploded. No one was exposed publicly. No dramatic reckoning. But something fundamental shifted. People stopped speaking about me and started speaking to me again. Invitations returned. Conversations softened. My name stopped being said with hesitation. And the family story changed, subtly but permanently. Now when the past comes up, it's described as complicated, as shared mistakes, as a difficult time for everyone. That's enough. Because here's the truth. I didn't win by humiliating them. I didn't win by revenge. I won by surviving long enough to be undeniable. They built their peace on my silence. I reclaimed it without raising my voice. And if there's one thing I learned through all of it, it's this. People don't fear anger. They fear calm memory, because anger fades, but records don't.